Racism in global development is a problem. It is a deep systemic issue.
We like to measure things in global development, but while there are many indices measuring gender equality in the sector, there are none focused on measuring racial equity. The Racial Equity Index is the very first index to measure racial equity in global development and hold the sector accountable for dismantling the systemic racism it was created to uphold.
We are a BIPOC-led collective.
We are global.
We are anti-racist.
Together, we collectively have over 50 years of experience working in the sector.
Every single person in our collective has experienced racism in global development.
The Racial Equity Index is groundbreaking and innovative and will serve as a metric for the sector in order to reduce harm and make meaningful impact in areas of racial equity.
Success looks like racial equity intentionally incorporated and integrated by organizations in a sustained manner.
Success looks like permanently shifting the dialogue around racial equity in the sector, recognizing that racial inequity and injustices sit at the root of global development.
Success looks like dismantling of systemic racism in global development, and instead creating a more just and equitable sector.
Success looks like more Black, Indigenous, and people of color in senior roles across the sector.
We are
the Racial Equity Index.
Hi everybody, this is our first podcast for the Racial Equity Index. Hi Lena, hi Beck.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you both doing?
Doing well. How's everybody?
Yeah, doing well. It's the afternoon here, the sun is shining. It's good right now.
I feel like well is like the fine, you know, and I say this to my daughter a lot. Fine isn't a feeling. I feel like well is a very similar word like fine, because it doesn't encapsulate all of different layers of human experience.
You're 1,000% correct. Absolutely. We've gotten accustomed, like many other things, to brush off quite literally our human emotions, which is very, very troublesome.
It's the politeness, isn't it? We're akin now to just, when I say, how are you? It's just a nicety, and we're going to get to the work. That's kind of how it is, right? Mm. And so in my mind, when you ask that, I'm like, well, it depends who I'm with. But also I'm like, well, do you really want to know how I am? Or do you not have time for that? In which case, I'm well, I'm fine.
I think this is the thing with our collective, the beauty of our collective, not the thing, but the beauty of our collective with the Racial Equity Index is that we have always worked to create a space or create a container where we can call each other kind of in with love and just say, not everything is well. What's up? What's going on? Because none of this work that we do in creating what we're trying to create as an accountability mechanism for a very racist global development sector is easy. And then add to that, life isn't easy right now. Our jobs aren't easy. Nothing about what we're doing is easy.
Absolutely. And then if you compound that with the expectation that we have to be fine, not just that, but if someone asks us truly, we have to tone down the actuality of our feelings, which in and of itself is incredibly harmful to us as human beings, but even more so with this work, because we can't be fine. Quite literally, when we walk out the door, our pure physical existence is political, no matter where you are. So I for one, and this is why I was mentioning recently how much I missed you all over the Christmas break, because you can't necessarily be that authentic with everybody.
Really good point. And also it's that part that like we deny, because if I was to say I'm really struggling, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to talk about the pain you go through at any given time. It's not the most joyful thing. And what we do really well is create the space at REI to sit with that pain and to really feel it. It's not comfortable. and yet it all resonates with each of us. And though we may not be able to click our fingers and make it all better, we have that support and that recognition and acknowledgement that actually, someone's in pain, someone's going through something difficult, someone's struggling. It's not okay, and that's okay. We will sit with you in solidarity, and we'll be here with you.
Damn, Lena, that's such a good point. I think that generates. There's so many. I think last week we just sat there for a moment, all of us just kind of absorbing how we were all feeling. But I think what that also generates is if you allow someone to be 100% honest with, listen, I'm not okay, it's kind of confirming to everyone else around them and close to them, okay, so not only do you feel comfortable telling me that you're struggling, I can also put my struggles on the table as well. And there is a real genuine respect and appreciation and love that comes with that, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of collective grief that we're all experiencing. We don't name it as that because we can't. We're not allowed to name grief for what it actually is. And also the systems that that we have to move through and exist in, which are racist, which are built on which is built on capitalism and white supremacy, doesn't allow us to actually sit and grieve with each other about the things that we've lost, the things that we're struggling through. And so there's a lot of emotion that is just collectively unprocessed that we don't ever get the space to process about the things that we have to interact with and experience. And this was one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, because I think we recognize as a collective that's now done the work that we've done for almost 2 years as volunteers, the amount of burden that Black people and people of culture, people of color have to go through on a daily basis, and the lack of space there is to actually effectively talk about it, and feel like you're being heard.
Yeah. I'm just that really hit me. That really hit me, because I think, especially in this work, we're so expected to. We're kind of, our passion for the cause and our mere existence is sort of exploited in a way. We're expected to just go hard all the time without actually sitting back for a moment and thinking about how this work is impacting us, especially if internally within each of our respective organizations or whatever situation we found ourselves in the past has been very harmful to us and people like us.
And it also speaks, you've touched on it, both of you already, that this is not the norm, this is not the culture that we see, and not ironically, not surprisingly, not just in one country. We're all in different countries right now, and yet it's still the norm to repress and suppress and not bring the issues up that are hard to deal with, because no one at the top is equipped to deal with it, and it makes things slower. And I think this is another point that we are that speaks to our values at REI, is the intentionality. If you're going to recognise that this is damaging work, and it is joyful work, and it is twisted, painful work, and it gives life as well. And if we're going to be really intentional about that, we need to be able to bring our full selves, all of that, to a space, which means being intentional about not moving forward at, the speed of light, and being okay with that.
It's, what you're saying, Lena, is making me think of all of the people, and we have seen this, this week. There was a report that came out on NCVO and the immense confirmation that happened of the complaints that came forward of racial violence and racism within NCVO. But the heartbreak that so many BIPOC people are reflecting on the lack of justice that was, not even the lack of the justice that was completely denied, because the two people that were in charge were allowed to leave the organization before any accountability was delivered. But how this intentionality that we move through our work with, how that is not allowed or even represented in any way, and the grief that then follows. You know, if you look at the fact that this is what happened with NCVO, has happened across the global development sector at large. CEOs being allowed to leave their organizations, being paid generously to leave their organizations, finding jobs, you know, that are bigger and better in the global development sector so they can continue to uphold and promote racial violence and racism in a new organization, and then BIPOC people just being left with the pieces, being left with no justice. And yet we're supposed to continue to work in this sector.
Right. Oh my. Because I think that, you know what, this leads me to think about something that with our work, because we're being quite intentional about it, and there's one word that keeps popping up throughout this whole conversation is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement takes time and money. And so larger organizations that are trying to, well, are wanting to be on the right side of history and quote unquote doing the work as far as this is concerned, I don't feel that there is any real acknowledgement of the grief and the trauma that their staff carry around when these things happen, because essentially it's the ultimate racial gaslight, right? Because you're denying the reality of these people by, one, not acknowledging it, and two, not taking it seriously enough to actually do the work, step back and actually ask the people responsible to take accountability. Not only that, but look to your staff and be aware and accountable and acknowledge everything that had happened up until that point.
Yeah, acknowledgement is a big piece, and then we ask the question, why? Why is it that there is lack of acknowledgement? Why is it? I mean, I don't know the full answers. I do know it's uncomfortable, and then we come back to that, like, no one wants to be uncomfortable or not be equipped to deal with things. And yet, with your point, Uma, about that, the report, the article that came out about everything that happened at NCVO, like, that feels so violent in my body when I think about that. It makes me so frustrated and angry that it's acceptable to treat people that way, to gaslight them, and for nothing to come of it, for there to be no accountability. And yet we can remain in this sector. I sometimes ask why, but we do remain in this sector. Why? Because we believe in hope, and we believe that there can be a better future for us. But it doesn't negate that it's just violence that we have to endure and we absorb into our bones and just continue, and these are like these invisible scars that we have to experience over and over and over again. And you know, the trauma that comes with that is immense. So having spaces like REI, and you know, there should be more. There should be more spaces like that to talk and have a space to be supported in that. And every organisation should have that. They don't. Yeah.
I think reflecting on, you know, the report that came out, the other piece that I'm reflecting on is the fact that, you know, while the trend is that white CEOs and deputy directors and, you know, the C-suite can leave organizations and move on and become expert consultants in their field, or become CEOs of other organizations, you know, and continue to be the white supremacists. The people who call out and speak out against racial violence and the racism within organizations are effectively blacklisted. You know, I reflect back on the fact that when REI started, we were an anonymous group. We didn't put our names out there until actually last year, because of the risk that we knew we would face as individuals and as a collective, of demanding the level of accountability that we're working to demand from this sector, because we know the sector isn't ready for it. And when I say sector, I mean the global development sector. We know the global development sector is not ready for this level of accountability. And so what we see not only is a lack of accountability for these white CEOs that get to recycle their racism and racial violence in another organization, but the complete whitewashing and dismissal and diminishing and gaslighting and so many other things of the people who actually fight for accountability within this sector and their organizations.
That's such a good point, Uma. I remember we were even having a conversation about, do we want to put our names on? Do we want to put our bios up? How do we go about this? Because we were aware of the very real consequences, and that in itself, that's an extra burden we have to carry. So there's another thing added to the load that we're already lugging around in this work. And it really frustrates me when we're looked upon as angry brown or black women or men and just aloof and not willing to participate. Or one thing that is really harmful is that we're not team players, but there's a real lack of understanding of what it means and what the message is to us when there are people high up in these organizations that do not have to answer for any of their actions or any of the actions of people below them when they were at the helm.
And that's what this is all about, like, the reckonings, reputation, those who are in the same networks and circles of others who, even though perhaps they do wrong, they are still protected. This is reflective of like the system that we're in, and we're watching it work as it's been set up to work. The only hope with the report, with the article, is that in some way people may be open to recognizing that these people have done damage. But then there's no guarantee of that. And they will continue. There's going to be, the sector is so big. People hear things, people don't. And there'll always be ones who want to stand by others who they may think have done nothing wrong when actually they've caused a huge amount of harm. We see it in history. Until something fundamentally changes at the top, I don't think it will change.
So I'm going to go back to this first question that I'd asked both of you all. How are we really?
Oh, Rima. Honestly, okay, if you want to be real, I'm a little fatigued already, and we're at, the end of the first month of the year. I'm a little fatigued because just what you mentioned about the report coming out, nothing has changed since we kind of shook things up a little bit in 2020, and I'm tired.
And I was trying to not say that I'm tired. I'm thinking it's January, and how can I be? Oh yeah, I'm feeling the tiredness. I like the word fatigued. I'm trying to hold on to that buoyancy of not letting my energy be sapped. And perhaps it's a protective mechanism of not. I see things. I'm choosing not to let them in as much, which is not great. And it's survival. Trying to get to that place where we can really start to progress things. I am getting tired, and it's January the 26th.
Yeah. Collective fatigue. I think that's where we are. And I think that's where we're going to stop for today. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Beck.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks, lovelies. A pleasure as always.